All right, my friends. This is I don't know how long this video is gonna be. We're just gonna start talking. I was reading more content to farm, and this is a pretty common thing you'll hear people say. Is computers are too easy to use now, and because of that, the average user is too dumbed down, low IQ, whatever. And we should have kept computers difficult for people to use because makes the internet, I don't know, a better place, I guess, just because dumb people can't use it. I don't know. I'm a dumb person, I use the internet. So but I was thinking about that, and I was like, okay, so what do they mean by that? And so somebody brought up that, what about cars? Cars are a lot safer and easier to drive now than they used to be, so maybe the average driver is less good on average, because anybody can drive now. And I'm sure that's true to an extent. But the example I brought up for the counter to that was that the first car crash in history had happened when there were literally two cars on the road, and somehow they managed to meet each other and crash into each other. So I said, for these safety guidelines and stuff, drivers aren't necessarily safer because they have to be safer. That accidents happen. That's why they're called accidents. But that's really neither here nor there. That was just something they brought up as an example. It's kind of irrelevant. What I did say though was ease of use coincides a lot with accessibility. So when we're thinking about this, like I've talked about this distribution I'm working on, and a lot of it isn't actually super impressive. It's basically just GNOME extensions right now. But the cool thing about it is anybody can benefit from it, but it specifically works for people with paralysis. So when you have all these GNOME extensions in your uh, and you have all these tweaks to make Linux more touch accessible, I want to say that the people who say that computers need to be harder are actively gatekeeping people with accessibility needs. Because remember, about 1% of the world has some sort of accessibility need. My dad, for instance, is hard of hearing, so he needs his computer to have a like narrator or something or whatever, or some sort of indicator that like tech or like subtitles or something. I don't even know, but he needs something like that. For visually impaired users, they need a screen magnifier. And for paralysis, what I'm using is I've got a tablet, and that's basically like the epitome of ease of use technology. Is hand somebody an iPad, and that's their, they can pretty much maneuver around an iPad for the most part. It would be nice if it had some adjustment, same thing with like a Windows 2-in-1 or something, but for the most part, you hand somebody a tablet, they can operate it. And I was saying though that, so part of the goal of this distribution is it needs to be readily available for people like caregivers who are generally not technical people. You know what I mean? Like it'd be cool if your caregiver was an IT specialist as well, but for the most part, you have somebody who wants to use this operating system. Their caregiver is like, okay, how the fuck do I install it? And you have to be able to teach them how to write a flash drive and boot into it and all that for the user because they're paralyzed, they can't do it. And after that point, the goal is that the patient should be able to install the operating system. That's kind of the whole goal. It's mostly done right now, but I need to rebase eventually once KDE makes their OSK, and then I got to do a lot more testing, and that's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be fun times. But what I was saying though was this mindset that it doesn't even really make sense in the first place because technology has quickly gone from being a luxury item to something that is part of everybody's daily lives. I probably couldn't get by without a smartphone at this point, and probably not even a Linux phone. So that kind of sucks on the one hand, but on the other hand, the only way forward is better ease of use to make computers more accessible for people. Because basically this whole argument boils down to gatekeeping. that you want people to have to be skilled with computers in order to operate them. But a lot of this ease of use stuff isn't so much allowing dumb people to use computers, but it's allowing people with special needs to use computers as well. And so I find the entire argument sort of ableist at the end of the day, you know, is would ease of use help somebody that doesn't, that doesn't want to learn how to use a computer? Sure. But it also helps people that maybe can't use a traditional computer, or they have some sort of like low mobility, or they have some sort of, accessibility need or something. So obviously, I'm going to champion computers being easy to use because part of my use case is I have to be able to deploy systems to people that don't know fuck all about Linux. And so that's kind of where I'm at, where ease of use is paramount because there are people that are non-technical that have to be able to use a computer. I've talked about donating computers to charity, and part of the problem is I don't get to meet any of these people that I give computers to. Somebody does, and they're people who I've given Linux computers to, so they kind of know how to operate Linux. But the people that they're giving computers to are mostly like people that can barely operate a smartphone. So, and I can't give them Windows anymore because now Windows 11 won't run on these old computers, or if I can work around it, I can't guarantee its stability. So I'm having to ship computers with Linux to people that don't know anything about computers, who probably can't even operate Windows. And I've talked about this before, that I give them Linux Mint because Linux Mint generally just works. You can just leave it alone and it'll just work. And that's important because you have all these people who I'm never going to meet. I can't teach them how to use this computer. And so they have to be able to get online, check their email and all that, perform their daily tasks without any tutorial whatsoever. And that's why, because I haven't gotten a lot of complaints yet, even like I've even done this to my mom. I made her run Solus Linux for a while and never got any complaints. But there's all these people, especially Windows users, that'll kind of naysay Linux and will say, "Oh, it's too hard. It's too hard. You're not going to be able to use it. You got to know the terminal and all that." And I, I obviously counter that. I mentioned it before that eventually you're going to have to learn how to use the terminal. It's just something's going to fuck up eventually, and you're going to have to use the terminal for something. But maybe not. Maybe your shit's just going to be stable forever. I don't know that. I don't know if it's going to be stable. That's not something I can guarantee you. So that's why I go with Mint, just because I've had the least issues with it. But, you have. I don't even remember where I was going with that. You have to be able to give a computer to somebody with no tutorial and have them operate it in a, you know, in a way that keeps them stable and up to date and all that. They have to be able to update their own machine and all that, and whatever. So that's why I tell people, I say, don't go into this bigotry of low expectations, because people are smarter than you think they are. I mean, like, I know that we want to say that, like, the average user doesn't, like, especially Generation Z or Alpha or whatever, doesn't know what a file folder is or whatever. You can tell them in about 2 fucking seconds what a file folder is and they'll figure it out. It's not their fault that they don't grow up with this shit anymore, that they're all on their phones, which don't even. They have folder structures, by the way, but except maybe on iPhone. But on you give them an Android phone, they're going to figure it out. And what you have to do, and this is what I always tell people, is you have to force people to learn things. And that's why, I say I give people this computer with Linux Mint, and I have had people complain when they buy computers from me that they don't know how to operate it. And I did have one old guy. He said, I was used to Windows 8 on my laptop. I need a computer with Windows 8 on it. And I said, you're not going to get those anymore because Windows 8 doesn't even have you can't even browse the web on it anymore. That's how bad it is, because forget what was revoked. SSH, not SSH, whatever the fuck, SSL keys, handshake, whatever, it won't work. Anyways, so yeah, I'm like, you're gonna have to eventually just learn the new system. Like, I can't give you Windows 8 back. You go out. So I eventually just said, go to Best Buy, buy a computer, and then they can deal with you. But I'm not dealing with you anymore. And now, meanwhile, though, I force somebody to use Windows or to use Linux, and they figure it out really quickly. As long as it does the things they need it to do, they can figure it out pretty easily. And so, you know, uh, that was kind of what I wanted to say was I don't like this notion that people are too dumb to use computers, and I don't like this notion that Linux is too hard for people to learn. Honestly, I think if computers more often shipped with Linux, like, okay, let's say your grandma asks what kind of computer to buy. If you tell her to go out and buy a framework and she does it, she will figure out how to use it. She may have to call you to ask for help with some things, but she will figure out how to use it. Because Windows is just as hard at the end of the day if you don't know what you're doing. Like for the example I use, I got a tablet with Windows 8 on it. I didn't know what the fuck to do with that thing. I didn't know how anything worked because I never used Windows 8 and they changed the UI so drastically that I genuinely couldn't figure out how to use it. And I was having to like Google shit and I ended up just installing 10 on that tablet and it was so bad. But this like shit, man. This doesn't make you special. Being able to use a fucking start menu or whatever the fuck, that doesn't make you special. Being able to open a web browser doesn't make you smart. Being able to boot into a flash drive doesn't make you special. It's the same thing that I used to watch this channel called Rags, and he would counter console gamers' arguments that PC gaming was too hard because it was obviously bullshit. Like anybody can learn how to use a PC. It was super easy to game on PC even back then. It was all a one-click affair with Steam or whatever. But now it's PC gamers have the same thing with Linux. Is they think that their fellow man is too retarded to install Linux Mint. This is kind of how it is, and I don't think it's true because obviously you've seen all these tech tubers switch to Linux bullshit videos, where they're like, "Oh, I need Adobe." And I was like, "Yeah, if Adobe worked on Linux, we would just be in paradise. Like everybody could switch to Linux and it would be perfect." But because Adobe still exists and people haven't figured out that their subscription software isn't like the devil incarnate and that their software doesn't get worse every fucking time they update it, you know. Yeah, so once Adobe figures out their shit on Linux and makes a buggy piece of shit on Linux, then we'll all be fine. Or if they figure out how to virtualize it in Windows so that even a normie can figure it out, that kind of thing. But it's really not that hard. And if you've ever seen the channel John Bolduan, like he just switched to Linux one day and he was like, "Oh yeah, this is the best thing ever. I'm using Ubuntu or something or Linux Mint or whatever he was using." And you can live happily without going like I did and installing fucking ArcSys 6 and all this other shit like Gentoo and whatever, like you can get by with Linux Mint and you can think that distro hopping is just switching from Ubuntu to Kubuntu and getting KDE instead of, GNOME, that kind of thing. You can do that. You can just live in your little bubble, never figure out anything. You don't have to know anything about Linux. It doesn't matter. It's an operating system. It's like Linus Torvald said. I can't remember if it was in Revolution RS or the Computer Chronicles, but he said the operating system is really just something that loads your programs. The end user doesn't think about it. They just use whatever ships to their computer. So if you give somebody a Linux computer, they aren't going to then uh, try to make a Windows USB on Linux, which, by the way, I don't think you can do right now. They would have to go find a Windows computer to do that and install Windows on their framework or whatever. But or Tuxedo, fucking Nova Custom, Clevo, System 76, Star Labs, whatever the fuck. A lot of those support Windows. But the average person they'll figure it out. And if you give them a computer with Linux on it, they don't have an incentive to change it enough to bother. And that's really why I say that Linux doesn't have super widespread adoption, is because right now if you want a Linux laptop, you have to go out and choose a Linux laptop. You don't go to Best Buy. They all have Windows or their Chromebooks or Macs or whatever. They don't have like a Linux desktop sitting there at Best Buy, And so but once they do, if that ever happens, if for some reason a Linux laptop manufacturer or an OEM started just shipping Linux computers, because I don't know, enough people complained and they're like, oh, I want this computer, but I really wish it shipped Linux or something. And yeah, if we had enough market share that that was a thing, that'd be cool. But then your average person can go buy a Linux laptop. Maybe the advertisement could be it doesn't have fucking ads in the desktop or something. And they could just buy a Linux laptop and it would probably work fine for them for the most part. Maybe it wouldn't have Microsoft Office or Adobe or whatever, except in the browser, but for the most part, who gives a fuck? Like, shit. This is a personal computer. It's not your work computer or whatever. So, yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I think that the whole, you need to be skilled to use a computer thing is sort of ignoring that a lot of people need this ease of use in order to just do their daily tasks on their computer because maybe they have some sort of need for it, where even if they were an expert at it, like you give somebody with cerebral palsy a terminal and it's like, okay, now type on what? Oh, on your keyboard. It's like, oh, you mean the thing I can't operate? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. It's just remember that when you're thinking, that maybe computers should be harder to use is yeah, a lot of it is dumbing it down, but a lot of it too is just making them more usable for different groups of people that have specific needs. And don't ever think that you're too dumb to use anything. Like I know obviously this is an advanced system and I'm super advanced user and I like doing that and it makes me happy to be able to fuck around with my computer and all that, but you don't have to do that. You can install Linux Mint and be the happiest person ever, and you can even be wrong about everything. I'm wrong about a lot of things, but you can just be like wrong and not know anything about Linux, but you can use Linux. And you can just do that. So I'll see you guys later. Bye.